Recently, we saw Mario Yamasaki make a pretty bad stoppage. Are you happy with this call? How are you feeling right now? Mario Yamasaki takes a lot of criticism, and I never want to see him refereeing ever again. He makes me sick. Despite his famous and endearing heart-shaped hands, Mario Yamasaki is one of the most hated referees in the history of the UFC. Over the course of his career, he has officiated some of the sport's most high-profile fights, and time after time, Mario found himself at the center of controversy. Mario has officiated over 400 fights across Strikeforce, the WEC, Elite XC, Pride FC, and of course, the UFC. For most of his career, he was actually considered a decent official. He was once regarded as one of the most respected referees in the game. However, 9 key fights over a 13-year span dissolved his reputation from a credentialed referee to an incompetent oversight. He is so notorious in the MMA community that he has spawned a plethora of memes, so let's dissect the fights that soiled Mario Yamasaki's career and determine if he truly deserves to be the most hated UFC referee. Mario Yamasaki was born in 1964 in São Paulo, Brazil, and grew up in a martial arts family. His half-Japanese father, Shigeru Yamasaki, was an 8th-degree judo red and white belt and passed along his martial arts teachings to Mario and his brother, Fernando. Mario fell in love with the art of grappling, but in 1986, at age 22, he transitioned to training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under several black belts and skilled grapplers, including his own brother, Fernando. With such deep roots in martial arts, it was only natural that Mario became aware of the UFC in the early and late 1990s when grappling arts dominated the early UFC tournaments. Mario was fascinated with the UFC's events and saw an opportunity to assist in organizing the first event in Brazil, now known as UFC 17.5, Ultimate Brazil, in 1998. The event showcased Brazil's rising talent, and you may remember Vitor Belfort's rushing knockout over Wanderlei Silva. After the event went off without a hitch, Mario approached legendary referee Big John McCarthy for a refereeing position within the promotion. He asked John why he was the only one refereeing in the UFC and what would happen if he got sick or injured. With the sport growing and in need of more referees, Yamasaki was brought in for his first event at UFC 20 the following year. Little did Big John or the UFC know a string of bad calls would follow. To be fair to Yamasaki, his first real blunder wouldn't come until UFC 52, a full 6 years and 44 fights officiated later. Some of his major mistakes happened years apart, with many fights in between where he didn't do anything wrong. However, the issue is that some of these calls, stoppages, and mistakes were so bad that they almost derailed the legacies of great fighters. On April 16, 2005, Matt Hughes faced Frank Trigg in a highly anticipated rematch. In their first fight, Hughes secured a spectacular standing rear naked choke to defeat Trigg in round 1. Matt Hughes did not think he could top that performance, but Mario Yamasaki certainly spiced things up. Less than 60 seconds into round 1, Frank Trigg landed a clear-as-day groin strike on Matt Hughes, and Mario Yamasaki completely missed it. Matt looked to the referee for help, but Yamasaki didn't see the illegal strike. While Hughes was signaling the foul, Trigg continued to attack him and nearly finished the champion with ground and pound. Even the commentary team couldn't believe what was happening. But it got worse. While trying to recover from the foul and the strikes that followed, Trigg took Hughes back and nearly finished him with a rear naked choke. Hughes miraculously escaped, slammed Trigg across the cage, took his back, and submitted him with a short choke to retain his title. While it was an inspiring comeback, the fight should have been stopped the moment the foul took place. Yes, Mario missed it, but it was his duty as the official to position himself so that he didn't miss blatant fouls in legacy-defining title fights like this. The fight is now in the Hall of Fame and is Dana White's favorite UFC fight ever, but we can't let that overshadow the fact that Yamasaki almost derailed a Hall of Fame career because of an unseen low blow. Let's take a turn into a more bizarre call Yamasaki made at UFC 70. Alessio Sakura faced Victor Valimaki on April 21, 2007, and just under 2 minutes into the fight, Sakura landed a beautiful right hand that stunned Valimaki. Yamasaki jumped in between them to presumably stop the fight, but to the confusion of the fans, Sakura, and the commentary team, Mario called a timeout because Valimaki's mouthpiece had fallen out. Thankfully, as soon as the fight resumed, Sakura picked up right where he left off and essentially earned 2 TKO victories in one night. While ensuring fighter safety is a referee's priority, stopping a potentially fight-ending exchange just for a mouthpiece is not standard practice. Usually, a referee waits for a break in the action to retrieve and return a fighter's fallen mouthguard. While the last two Yamasaki mistakes ended with the right fighter winning, we can't say that for UFC 142 in January 2012. Eric Silva met Carlo Prater in a welterweight showdown. Just seconds into the opening round, Silva landed a beautiful knee that wobbled Prater and followed up with swift and powerful shots, forcing Yamasaki to step in and call the fight. That should have been the end of the story, but as Silva was happily awaiting the official reading of the decision, Yamasaki ruled the fight a disqualification loss for Silva due to illegal punches to the back of the head. Nearly every shot that landed was to the side of the head, which prompted Joe Rogan to interrogate Yamasaki on the spot. Yamasaki did not seem confident in his decision, and the controversial call left a permanent disqualification loss on Silva's record. This pattern of poor stoppages, missed fouls, and bad calls continued, with some of the worst examples being the Glover-Teixeira versus Fabio Maldonado fight, Cody Garbrandt versus Augusto Mendes, and Donald Cerrone versus Alex Oliveira. However, nothing topped Yamasaki's final and most infamous blunder at UFC Fight Night 125 on February 3, 2018. Valentina Shevchenko made her flyweight debut against Priscilla Cachoeira, and it was an absolute beatdown. Shevchenko landed 230 strikes while Cachoeira returned only 3. The fight should have been stopped multiple times, but Yamasaki just stood by. Shevchenko had to switch to a rear naked choke to finish the fight because ground and pound wasn't enough. Dana White was furious, saying, "I never want to see him reffing ever again." That was the last straw. Yamasaki was effectively banned from the UFC. Looking back, Yamasaki argues that a few bad assignments shouldn't define his career. He has admitted to many of his errors, stating that human mistakes are inevitable. However, poor refereeing can ruin careers, halt momentum, and lead to unnecessary damage. So, does Mario Yamasaki deserve the title of the worst referee in UFC history? Or is there another referee who is even more deserving of that title? Stay tuned, I just might make a video about it. Despite Yamasaki being one of the most notorious referees in UFC history, he was far from the only official to make bad calls. Refereeing in MMA is one of the most difficult jobs in the sport because there is no room for error. Fighters train for months, if not years, for an opportunity in the Octagon, and a referee's decision can either solidify their legacy or unjustly stain their career. One of the biggest referee mistakes in UFC history didn't come from Yamasaki, but rather from Steve Mazzagatti, a name synonymous with controversial calls. Mazzagatti's officiating blunders span across several years, but one of his worst took place at the Ultimate Fighter 10 finale in 2009. This event was headlined by the much-anticipated fight between Roy Nelson and Brendan Schaub, but the real controversy stemmed from the matchup between Jon Jones and Matt Hamill. At the time, Jones was an undefeated prospect with an immense amount of hype behind him, and many saw him as the future of the light heavyweight division. Early in the fight, Jones completely dominated Hamill, taking him down with ease and unleashing relentless ground and pound. The fight was all but over when Jones made the fateful mistake of throwing 12-6 elbows, an illegal strike in MMA. The rule, originally implemented due to concerns about downward strikes causing unnecessary damage, was widely criticized as outdated. Mazzagatti immediately stopped the fight, and rather than ruling it a no contest or deducting a point from Jones, he made the decision to disqualify him, awarding the victory to Hamill. To this day, that remains the only official loss on Jon Jones's record. While Hamill was visibly hurt, the illegal strikes were not what caused the damage. It was the dominant performance Jones had put on up until that point. Many fans and analysts have argued that a warning or point deduction would have been the appropriate response, but Mazzagatti's decision drastically altered history. Dana White was furious and continued to voice his frustration with Mazzagatti for years after the fight. In an interview, White stated, "Mazzagatti is the worst referee in MMA, period. The guy shouldn't even be in there." The loss didn't affect Jones's career too much as he went on to become the youngest champion in UFC history and arguably the greatest of all time, but it remains one of the most baffling referee mistakes in the sport. Another highly controversial moment in MMA history came at UFC 104, where Lyoto Machida defended his light heavyweight title against Mauricio Shogun Rua. This fight was not necessarily ruined by the referee, but it was a prime example of how poor officiating can lead to disastrous consequences. Throughout 5 rounds, Shogun repeatedly landed cleaner and more effective strikes, targeting Machida's body and legs while avoiding major damage himself. Many watching live had the fight clearly scored for Shogun, but when the decision was announced, Machida was declared the winner. The backlash was immediate, with fans, fighters, and analysts all calling it one of the worst robberies in UFC history. The referee did not intervene incorrectly, but allowing the fight to go to the judges in such a manner only fueled the growing debate about MMA officiating. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment something hilarious down below because I have way more stories to tell.